Hello and welcome to the Comic Literate podcast, or should I say welcome back. Read the first intro by accident. Never mind. The podcast that does deep dives into the best of comic books, graphic novels, mangas, penny dreadfuls, webcomics, newspaper comics, and essentially any single-frame illustrations where the characters use bubbles to talk or think. I'm getting good at that. I'm your host, Ryan, or soon to be known as Comic Stan, soon to happen, the resident comic book expert, by which I mean I know who Grant Morrison is. And with me, as always, is my congenial co-host and resident literature expert, by which I mean he owns a book. It's Jamie. Hello, Jamie.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Do you like the intro changes?
Congenial is a beautiful term for one as grumpy as I.
I thought I'd surprise you with it. And to be fair, most of the time you are congenial, according to the dictionary definition that I checked earlier.
I suppose that is an aspect of my character. I'm an affable fellow.
Do you know how I found it? How I found the word?
How?
I searched extrovert into a thesaurus. And a few words came up and I thought, you know what? I'm going to introduce a new one each week, just for our own entertainment.
Did you come up against loquacious yet?
No, that I can't remember if that wasn't. It was a short list, and I don't remember if that was actually in there or not. But
loquacious is a nice one. It just means that you say a lot of words.
Oh, so it's not quite extroverted.
Yeah,
you could be a quiet, loquacious person.
Yeah,
you just like have to listen in for like. Ooh, that's the words. So yes, welcome back to another episode. We are just entering the British cold winter, which I am absolutely hating right now.
It's miserable.
Yeah, it reminded me, right now I hate the cold and I'm okay with the heat, which is lucky for the global warming issue that's happening.
Yeah.
But I remembered actually being a teenager and I was the opposite. And I think I realized why, and this kind of suits this podcast. Back then, if it was hot and sunny outside, my parents would be like, why don't you go outside? And I was like, nah, I don't want to. And when it was cold, there was no pressure to go outside. So I was like, I like this weather.
I remember when I was a teenager, I lived up north. And I survived 3 northern winters without turning my heating on. And now I can't, my bones are cold.
Well, that's on twofold, because on the one hand, it is getting colder. That's like climate change. And the other hand, you're older. And then older people just can't regulate temperature as well.
You feel it, don't you?
Yeah,
it's incredible.
If you've had any like fracture or breaks, you feel that bone in the cold.
Oh, and do you know, my partner and I were talking about all of the bones I've broken, and it is an extensive list.
Really?
Yeah, I just break myself in stupid ways, Ryan.
Was that all from karate?
Couple of them. My knuckles, all the knuckles on my right hand were from karate. But then my leg was from dancing.
I remember that. That was skanking. Specifically.
I slipped over in my own spill. I threw a gin and tonic at somebody and then slipped in my own gin and tonic that I had spilled in an act of instant karma. Was
that an intentional throwing your gin and tonic at someone?
I don't remember. I was drunk enough that I walked home on the broken leg. Broke my tibia and my fibia.
Jeez, so there's the 2 in the calf.
Oh yeah. Ooh. I fucked myself up good and proper.
Jesus,
absolutely. But yeah, no, it aches. It aches
in the cold specifically.
Yeah, and one of the things that is really affecting me this winter is that I've bought a property which was built around the same time that the comic book we're talking about today was set.
Wow!
And once you tell them which comic book we're talking about, they'll realize just how poorly insulated this building is.
Well, before we get into that one thing...
Oh, it was such a lovely segue, though.
It's such a great segue. And let's put a pin in that just for... All right, we're going to be doing the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
I won!
The reason being is because recently we had the passing of illustrator Kevin O'Neill.
Yes.
So this was the kind of, I think, the thing he was most famous for. So we thought, let's do this. Also, love a bit of Alan Moore.
Well, it gives us... We've talked about Alan Moore so much.
It's a comic book podcast, and he's one of the most famous, well-regarded comic book writers of all time.
And so this really gives us an opportunity to talk about Alan Moore.
Talk about his writing in depth and really, really give it to him. Yeah,
yeah, really get in there. The problem is, when I first started reading this, I didn't like it.
Well, hold that thought, because we do have a couple of things.
I'm holding a lot of thoughts today, Ryan.
We have a couple of, as always, if you're not saying them, you're holding them. We have a couple things. First up top, it would not be a comic-based podcast, and you'll see the connection if we don't mention the passing of Kevin Conroy. You know who that is?
No, not a clue.
So Kevin Conroy is the definitive voice of Batman.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
Yes.
sorry, I do.
So
yeah.
starting from the animated series in the 90s, which was around the time that Keaton was the first live action Batman, until literally a couple of years ago. So he was even though other people did the voice as well, he was the definitive Batman voice across not only decades, but across 4 or 5 live action Batman. So the fact that he stayed so relevant and revered during that time, Cat's got these cat scratcher. So.
Yeah, sorry.
I mean, we're talking about Batman. Catwoman's a character. It's kind of related, isn't it?
Cat shenanigans is just a part of it, unfortunately.
Of course. So, but yeah, Kevin Conroy was not only just a great voice actor, but again, just like such a good Batman. He had a very distinct Batman voice to a Bruce Wayne voice.
Yeah.
The Batman voice was it was kind of lower pitch and it was very to the point. Like he didn't he was always very direct, not quick, not fast, but just like he didn't waste any space or syllables.
Yes.
Whereas Bruce Wayne's a bit more like, hey, how's it going? Bruce Wayne. Nice to, you can tell which is the cover.
Yeah.
So one thing I've been looking through like some classic Batman animated season and Justice League series stuff,
which also means that you get to listen to a lot of Mark Hamill, which is just Mark Hamill as the Joker is the best performance he's ever done.
They were like
they were the pair, weren't they?
Yes, exactly. They loved working with each other, and
as soon as you mentioned Batman, I actually read Mark Hamill's eulogy to Kevin Conroy, and it was touching. It was really touching.
Lots of love pouring out for him, which is great as well. And again, we have to mention here because Batman, whether you like it or not, with superheroes and everything, Batman is one of, if not the most famous comic book character of all time. In terms of a character starting in comics, from how early comics started to now, he's up there.
It's strange because Batman's been on my mind a lot recently because I'm buying Christmas presents for my partner, who is a Batman collector.
It's a good time.
And so, yeah, absolutely. So I've been looking at lots of figures of Batman and lots of models of the Batmobile, just to add little bits to her collection around Christmas time. And so I've seen a lot of effigies of the man himself recently.
And yeah, this is the whole reason. One of the things that was interesting, I think very noteworthy about Kevin Conroy was for a long time he was gay without being out, I think.
Was he?
And when he then came out, I'm almost certain he came out while working and being famous. I don't think he came out before. I might be wrong about that, but the important thing to know is he likened the secret identity of Bruce Wayne to Batman to literally being a closeted gay man. And I think that really fits not just in like he's pretending to be someone else, but in a very kind of like code switching, putting on a different identity when talking to certain people. And that was the Batman character. So I think he did say he empathized with that aspect of the character, which I thought was a unique point.
Yeah, doesn't it make sense?
Yeah, of course, yeah. So I think that's a main point to bring up. We do have a couple of sections that we need to get across. The first one is, and I don't know, I might be springing this on you, but we are coming around to the second iteration of Jamie's like comic, but with no pictures and more words corner.
Yeah, so I finished Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence.
Right.
It was lovely. It was a really great story about brotherhood and betrayal and South Africa. It was a really interesting description of South Africa from the perspective of a white man in the early 20th century.
Right.
I will leave you with that. I will leave you to draw whatever conclusions from that you'd like.
I mean, it's got its connotations, I'll put it that way.
And I have just picked up a novel by Philip Pullman.
Okay.
Who you'll recognize as the Northern Lights author.
Yes, and no, I'm thinking of Terry Pratchett. Never mind, I'm thinking of someone else.
Read plenty of Pratchett. Pratchett will be mentioned. But it's a novel by Philip Pullman that I literally just picked up in a charity shop. Never heard of it.
Wow.
And it's a story about, it's called, the title has something to do with Jesus and Christ. It's a really long title.
You're not thinking of the Bible.
I'm just reading the New Testament. I'm going to get it. It's
the Bible, but it was signed by Philip Pullman for like no reason. And now they just like sell it like, it's a Philip Pullman edition.
I'm back, baby. It's called The Good Man Jesus and the Scoundrel Christ. I'm only like 20 pages into it. But it is essentially Philip Pullman's like reimagined New Testament.
Right. So I wasn't that far off.
No, you weren't.
So-
you weren't. It's kind of biblical, but kind of not biblical, and it's his interpretation of kind of Christ the martyr and Jesus the revolutionary, I suppose.
Right.
And so hopefully by the time we come back around, I'll have read it and I can tell you about it.
Well, we are on bated breath looking forward to it. By we, I mean me and the cat, obviously.
Nobody else gives a shit.
Well, they will soon. We'll keep it going long enough. But my own contribution is my Ryan's like comics, but the pictures move very fast, forming a moving image corner.
Oh, hello. I like this
working
corner.
title. But the only film I actually saw recently, since last time, was Black Panther 2. So that's the only one I can really talk about. But obviously a comic book based film, but a superhero film. And overall, it was good. It's a rare instance of a film that's almost desperately missing its lead actor from the first film.
Yeah, isn't it?
And it's a rare instance where it's not just a recasting, or like other films have had characters die and they're just not in it, which is technically the case here. But a whole plot centers around the missing character of Black Panther, played by Chadwick Boseman. So it's kind of bittersweet at points. It's kind of respectfully pays homage to not only the character but the man who played him in a very unique way. It's I've spoilers for Black Panther if you've not seen it or not.
I haven't.
And this is this is a minor spoiler I don't think you would care about, but find interesting at the very least. They managed to resist the temptation to do a deep fake cameo, and I thought, it's rare that I'll think about like a big corporation. I thought, you know what, good on you. Like you resisted that.
I was just listening to Cortex. I've shown you Cortex, haven't I?
Yes, a bit. Yeah,
Mike Hurley from the Relay Network and CGP Grey.
Yeah,
and they had a whole conversation about their feelings on AI produced art, and one of the things that they really went into depth on was people using AI to bring back dead actors, or to young up Mark Hamill, and all of the implications of it. And so it's really interesting that you mentioned that Disney didn't do that, because they fucking live for it.
Well, they live for it, and like this was one of those scenarios where this was the biggest role of Boseman's career, and it's, you can make that exception of like he lived for this almost. Like
he didn't get to have a very long career. He had a really tragic end, didn't he?
No, and he got to heights that are difficult for someone in field of acting, becoming a major movie star.
Also being a really prominent part of the MCU as a black man.
Exactly.
Not many black characters in the MCU, is there?
He wasn't the first, but he was the first central role. Like the only one that came after him, I would say, is Anthony Mackie becoming Captain America.
Yeah.
And even that, he hasn't had a solo film. Like there's, the MCU franchise is made up of mini franchises, and Chadwick Boseman, Black Panther was the first black-centered film. You had Luke Cage as the Netflix series, which I think is underrated and good, but Black Panther was the furthest reaching one.
I don't know how I feel about it, because it kind of has that Africa vibe to it.
Well,
do you know what I mean?
I know what you mean, but the way I kind of look at it is, it apparently, according to best sources, it's made by people who are knowledgeable about the subject and are doing it the way not only that they think it should be well received, but it is by and large received very well by the community it's aimed at, and and is for and emulating and everything. Yeah. So you as the white person, you wait to be like, what do they think? And then you wait all right, that's fine then.
Are the black people cool with it? Cool, it's okay. And that's valid. Like, I think that's the way it should be.
That is what is called listening. As a white cis male, we're like, let's just wait to see what everyone else's reaction is first.
I'll try a little bit and see what I think about it. Oh, they like it. Cool, good. Yeah, I can like it now.
Although I will say there is a revisionist history when it comes to the Blade films, because technically he was the first.
Oh yeah,
he wasn't very representative, I'll 100% give you that, but if you're going by a technical, he was the first. And the first Blade film, first and second Blade films, are decent.
Do you know what, though? I think it's kind of interesting because his blackness isn't a prominent aspect of his character,
Not
which
at
is
all.
the way it should be with black characters. They should just happen to be a black person going about doing whatever it is they do, whether or not that be hunting vampires or...
Well, there's a line between, I think, happens to be and celebrating it as well. And I think you should get both.
That's valid.
One thing I really liked about Luke Cage as a character and as a Netflix series was I felt he was representative much more of the modern day realism of black life, whereas Chadwick Boseman one is the fantastical creating a fiction to celebrate people, and that has its place as well. Like, you want both. Like, you want, like, I always akin it to like the difference between, and we're going to mention this later, but the difference between like Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones, because that's high and low fantasy. So in high fantasy, you just make up whatever you want because it, you know, it's elves and all. It's cat is strangling me with a cord.
What I have done is taken the bell off of her.
There we go. We're good now. I'll probably leave that in just for a laugh. But
Yeah.
But so Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings is like, well, there's no racism or sexism or anything because it's all magic. Like, we can make what we want. Game of Thrones, called low fantasy, is like, well, what if it was... Oh, message. Game of Thrones is like, what if there was magic, but in our history? So, like, you've still got all the shit of racism, sexism, and violence and torture and everything, but there's dragons and magic and stuff as well. So there are two avenues to go. And I feel like that's the difference, is whether you go, well, what if it's just someone, you know, being themselves normally versus, well, we can make whatever we want in this because it's, you know, fantastical, so why not let's make it whatever we want. And I think that's the difference between like realism and non-realism, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Even though the non-realism technically still has magic in, but that's or magic powers, whatever.
Yeah.
So I think we'll covered those points, and I think we're about to get into the main course.
Oh, yeah, let's just get into it.
Well, I've got a great bit to start us off on, and I did kind of tease this to you a little bit first, but I've got to bring to the table today some amazing Alan Moore news, right?
Oh, you mentioned this.
Yes. And
what's he been up to?
Well, it's not what he's been up to. It's something that he did previously, which I don't think is very well known.
Okay.
So, and what I like about this as well is it's a bit of information that if you're not in this niche audience or this you know circle, then it just sounds like absolute bollocks. Like, why would this matter? But you'll understand this. So, famously, Alan Moore, how does he feel about every adaptation of his works?
He doesn't like it at all. He actually finds it quite unsavory.
Exactly. And not even unsavory, just bad. Just bad writing. He thinks it's all bad and doesn't want anything to do with it.
Yeah.
So famously, he also goes so far that he not only doesn't want his name on any of the adaptations, and I don't even mean like that he helped make the adaptation, but when the adaptation goes like Watchmen, V for Vendetta, when they say based on, it's like this one would be like based on an illustration by Kevin O'Neill. So it just looks like this kind of empty, like, well, all right, someone illustrated it. Who wrote it? You don't know. You can't know. He's withheld that information. He's even sued to have that information not available.
Really?
Yeah. He's like been like, literally, if you put that on there, if you put my name on there, I'll sue. It's like, yeah, but you did write it. It's like, don't take my name off it. Like, that's the level that he operates on. So Alan Moore famously hates, you know, any adaptation
of his work. Yeah.
So I follow a YouTuber, a guy called Mr. Sunday Movies, and his podcast, The Weekly Planner Podcast. And they've been doing deep dives into Alan Moore. They're doing an Alan Moore-a-thon. So it's great.
An Alan Moore-a-thon.
Exactly. So they've been doing...
It's a Moore-a-thon? You get more of it?
Exactly.
Oh, that's so good. Why didn't we think of that?
They've been doing Watchmen, V for Vendetta, League of Gentlemen, all the films adaptations specifically.
Of course.
So in one of them, what I found very interesting was... There was another lesser known adaptation, and what it is Alan Moore wrote a story for Superman during one of his runs.
Oh.
And that story was adapted into an episode, maybe a two-parter, but at least an episode of a show, Justice League Unlimited. So that was literally a Justice League cartoon, followed the animated series as well as the Batman animated series and the Superman animated series. So literally those ended, and then Justice League started with the same voice actors. So come back to Kevin Conroy and a famous Superman voice actor, Mark Hamill as well. they all kind of followed on. So it's kind of like a spiritual successor to multiple series that came before. And in one of the episodes, they do this story about Superman. It's Superman's birthday, and he basically gets someone sends him a plant as a gift, but the plant attaches itself to Superman, and it makes him hallucinate that he's back on Krypton, that it never blew up, that he's got everything he wanted, basically. Like
off his tits on acid.
Well, yeah. But almost like a happy coma to keep him docile, essentially. So Alan Moore wrote this original story that it was based on. So when the makers of Justice League were adapting this episode, they went to Alan Moore and they said, "Hey, we're making this TV show. We've already made a couple seasons. We want to do an episode based on your story of Superman." So the makers go to Alan Moore. We're making the adaptation of your comic.
Yeah.
Would you like to just look over the script and give us your thoughts and that kind of thing? And he was like, "Yeah, sure." And looked over it.
So he always is like, "Yeah, I'll have a look." And then he reads it and goes, "No, this is garbage."
Well, I think there's a difference between Marvel and DC kind of like selling off big film rights and gaining a lot of money, which he just didn't get. So he was kind of like, if I'm not getting nothing from this big deal, which you really should give me something, but you give me nothing, I won't even let you use my name. Whereas this Justice League show, it was a kid show, technically, a very good kid show, but it was a kid show. It wasn't like DC were like, "We've got a new cartoon show coming out." It was like, we'll give it to someone we can make some toys or whatever. But yeah, I think the fact that the people went to Alan Moore, they were like, "We would like your thoughts." And he said, yeah, and helped them out. And they took out a lot of stuff, but apparently I think Alan Moore was very sympathetic to the fact that they were making a 20-minute cartoon out of several issues. So there's a whole arc about Superman's dad becoming like a dictator on Krypton because he failed, because he wrongly predicted the planet exploding, and then people mocked him for it, and then he kind of went bad or something. They took all of that out. But so the main piece of news that this is about, and this was revealed on Miss Sunny Movies, their Caravan of Garbage show, the fact that Alan Moore allowed them to use his name.
Oh, wow. He actually did.
It's the only Alan Moore adaptation that in the credits has based on the story by Alan Moore.
Oh, well done, Alan.
Exactly.
I'm really proud of him.
I heard of this and I thought, oh, this is big news.
I can't wait to tell Jamie.
Big revelatory news.
Yeah, absolutely.
So from there, we move on to the main course, which is, of course, the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I've got the blurb. League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Volume 1, comic book limited series, written by Alan Moore and illustrated by Kevin O'Neill, rest in peace. Published under the America's Best Comics imprint of DC Comics in the United States and under Vertigo in the United Kingdom in March 1999. Vertigo, you remember, being the publisher of Why the Last Man.
Yep.
So definitely that kind of non-superhero, the grittier, more adult stories. We're going to be reading a lot of those from the Vertigo imprint of DC.
Yeah.
I've also got the Goodreads blurb, which I would like to do, if you'll allow me, in my movie trailer, coming this summer voice.
Okay, go.
Okay. London, 1898. The Victorian era draws to a close and the 20th century approaches. It is a time of great change and an age of stagnation, a period of chaste order and ignoble chaos. It is an era in need of champions. In this amazingly imaginative tale, literary figures from throughout time and various bodies of work are brought together to face any and all threats to Britain. Alan Quatermain, Mina Murray, Captain Nemo.
Sorry, I can't hold it together.
The cat jumped at the wrong time. Bye, cat.
It's the list of the characters.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
It just, poor Mina Murray. She went through so much.
Yeah. Dr. Henry Jekyll and Edward Hyde, and Hawley Griffin, the Invisible Man, form a remarkable legion of intellectual aptitude and physical prowess. The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Now, my first issues with that blurb, thank you, My first issue with that blurb is it makes the characters sound a lot better than they actually are. And I say that as someone who enjoyed the comic, and I'd probably say this is one of my favorites, maybe top 10, top 20 around then. But the characters, with the exception of the amazing Mina Murray, they're all absolute shitheels. Like every one of them.
Shitheels.
Yeah, I heard her recently. I'm including that in my lexicon. It's like a word a day, but for swears. But yeah, the main thing I noticed when starting this comic is all characters absolutely suck except for Mina Murray.
Quatermain regains some of his competence.
Oh yeah, the competence regaining is the best part of him. It's the most traditional part of his arc as an almost main character.
Yeah, and as a recovering opium addict.
Well, yeah, and I made a note about that because I found that to be that's a very Alan Moore version of a hero refusing the call. It's like most of the time it's like, I've retired and I've got a family and I can't do this anymore. And Quatermain's just like, I need more opium. Leave me, wench. I need heroin. Wow, what a hero.
Which is kind of often Sherlock Holmes's arc.
Well, that was for a while, but in the original books, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, he just goes and does heroin, and then someone's like, Sherlock, there's a case. He's like, all right, let me just shake off this heroin and I'll be...
yeah, in The Sign of Four, which is the first one, there is a point at which... I might not be in The Sign of Four, it's in one of them. I've read all of them. There is a point at which Watson sees Holmes between cases.
Right.
And it's between cases that he does drugs.
Right.
And he says, I saw the bottles on the table and I wondered if it was the cocaine or the opium this time. And so Holmes has this very Victorian relationship with drugs. There's kind of two big tropes of the drug user in Victorian literature. There is the dandy in an opium den, see Dorian Gray.
Right.
Or there is the doctor, who is administering very careful doses for the desired effect.
Right.
And that's Holmes.
Right.
Holmes isn't a chaotic drug user.
He's probably one of the first functional addicts in literature.
And the concept of a functional morphine or opium addict is very prevalent in Victorian and early 20th century media. And also just, it was a thing. Doctors would often be morphine addicts.
I'm just having a little bit of smack. And just a little bit of smack.
Just a little bit of skag.
Just a little.
And then I'm going to go about my day, treat my paintings. I'm going to invent a dildo to cure hysteria and the wandering womb.
You know, apparently the first dildo was a...
bees in a box.
A hollow wooden thing with bees in it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Which begs the question, what the fuck happened to the bees?
I mean, I assume they must have been let go afterwards, but...
Would you? Would you want that job?
You think it's like a self thing, isn't it? Like, no. I mean, the rich people obviously had their own bee changers.
So that is so interesting because that's an example that gets bandied about a lot, but that's something that one queen did. Like that was an incredibly wealthy woman who had the bee dildo. And so I imagine she would have had a person whose job it was to empty the bees out at the end of the day.
And also imagine being sexually frustrated and trying to catch bees. Just the worst.
Oh, I'm so horny. I better get my beekeeping outfit.
But then trying to catch them alone. Like, get in the box. Get in there.
Sorry.
I don't know.
Me. I'm not doing very well.
This will be clipped. This will be clipped.
Yeah. Okay, we're back in the room. I had a bit of a giggle and fit.
Yeah. So one thing I liked was at the very first page, and you saw they had the old-timey poster, like a kind of freak show poster, like come see the attractions or whatever. I made note of Moore's description. So it was instead of like the credits, it was like a description for each one. And I liked it because I thought he must have wrote it. I don't know if he did, but so his is, at tremendous expense, we are proud to present Mr. Alan Moore, the world-famous Northamptonshire Nightingale, famed for his verbal recitations and comical narratives.
Wait, is he not from Birmingham?
Apparently Northamptonshire. He speaks like Birmingham, though.
Well, he speaks like a Brummie, but that just might be because he's... Have I been saying he's a Brummie this entire time and he's actually from Northamptonshire?
I believe that's cancelable action.
Yeah, it is. 1 minute. I'm gonna... God, he does look like a fucking wizard, doesn't he?
I mean, but I think that's intentional.
Yeah.
He's like, stop calling me a wizard. He's like, no, please call me a wizard.
We're ruining any chance of either of us ever meeting Alan Moore.
I mean, we might meet him, but he won't like it.
He won't enjoy the experience.
I was still going to be like, oh, but I'm a massive fan. Like, it's all in jest. Like,
but talking about him adopting the kind of parlance of Victorian England, it's clearly something that he had an abiding fascination for early in his career because of From Hell.
Yes, exactly.
He liked to set things in Victorian England, and I don't know if that's purely a matter of copyright.
Well, he must have been reading these books, like all these stories that the characters are from. Like, he must have been reading,
and they're all kind of the type of Victorian novels that a schoolboy in the mid-20th century would have read.
Exactly. And he must have had an affinity for the setting that they're all in, because that must be like the thought of like, oh, what if, you put them all together? Like, because how many copyright-free characters are there across like span of set where they were set in? Like, you go hundreds and hundreds of years.
Well, I think this is what's interesting, because if he was using characters from pulp novels that he would have grown up reading in the 60s, James Bond is a prominent one. He had to rename him Jimmy Bond, as did Woody Allen.
Yes.
But these Victorian era novels are the same kind of trove of literature that Disney were using.
Yeah, and then they copyrighted their versions of them. So
they are so aggressive in maintaining that copyright.
But what's interesting, I think, is so they have their own versions copyrighted. So you can do an original, like proper original to the original text, like Snow White or Cinderella. But you can't, but the most famous versions, the version everyone knows, is the Disney version, and you can't do that because that's theirs. I think that's how it works.
That's absolutely how it works.
Yeah, because they couldn't just retroactively be like, well, we own that now, like, because it was already copyright free.
Functionally, though, they did that for a long time. Have you ever heard the story of the girl with the Alice illustration?
Vaguely, yeah.
So a young artist posted,
for our listeners,
a young artist posted an illustration of Alice. Based on the original illustrations from the text. Disney took it, printed it on a bunch of purses, and then she saw them for sale and she was like, oi fam, what's going on? And they were like, well, it's Alice, it's our character. And she's like, no, that's not your character, that's my illustration of Alice. And there was a big legal battle, and I believe the internet crowdfunded her defense.
Wow.
And she was able to get royalties for the purse.
That's good.
For the sale of the purse. But it was the first time Disney had really, in any meaningful way, acknowledged that they don't actually own the copyright to these characters. But I think this is why Alan Moore was playing with these characters, because it was an interesting way for him to use really well-established characters that a good part of his audience would be familiar with, but also characters that he could change and mold to serve their role in the story. Something I really want to talk about later is the way he's used Hyde. But we can talk about that later.
Well, the point I was making with like how many copyright-free characters are is he must have had some kind of love for this setting because he just picked the characters with all in this one setting.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think he also had a bit of like, I mean, he's a comic book fan himself. Like, he's definitely a superhero fan himself because he's written amazing ones.
Yeah, a bunch of
maybe probably in the past, maybe not so much these days. But the point I'm making is I think he definitely wanted to make his own Avengers or Justice League, and rather because that's what he did with Watchmen. I don't know if that was before or after this.
Well, after or was Watchmen before?
Was Watchmen 80s? I think it might have been 80s or early 90s.
So Watchmen was his critique of superhero comics. It was his critique of the genre, and it's very much not a pastiche, but
it's a parody, it's a homage, it's a pastiche, it's all of them.
I suppose a pastiche is where you do it to comic levels, like comical levels. So I think Watchmen was his way of writing a gritty homage to comic book writing, whereas you're totally right, 87. Whereas this was him trying to write something that would directly compete with the Justice League comic.
And this ran for a while. I'm not sure how long he wrote on it, but it lasted quite a few volumes.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes right into the 20th century. And so you get Jimmy Bond. Yep. And he brings it right into the 20th century and starts doing... They become a bit camp, I think. Like Jimmy Bond is kind of a bit of a pastiche of Bond in the same way that Woody Allen's Jimmy Bond is. But when he's dealing with the Victorian characters, he is trying to create these he's not using the characters as written, and he's changing some key things about the stories that they appear in and the lives that they led, but he is using them to create a Justice League style. Now we would probably more call it an Avengers style group, isn't he?
And what's interesting is that there's always, like, it's been so stereotyped nowadays, but the bringing together of the group.
What I said earlier, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the first volume reads like the first 20 minutes of a heist film.
Yes, like Ocean's 11 specifically.
Is the one, or the Rick and Morty heist episode.
Exactly.
Is exactly
yes.
what it made me think of.
Getting a team together with different skills and all that.
And then they're all reluctant.
Yes, and that's what I was going to make a point, was the reluctance is normally like, I work alone, I don't work in a team. This one is like, a bloody woman. Like, it's so just, it's racism and sexism and violence is the only reason they don't like each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And he does, and again, something that we talked about before we went live, was...
We should just not speak before the podcast starts.
Yeah, absolutely, because I said really interesting stuff and I can't remember any of it.
I mean, I don't recall you saying anything interesting, but I'll take your word for it.
Get out. Get the fuck out. Is the undercurrent of colonialism.
Yes, that's actually one of my first notes, is I thought a very apt line from is it Guy Campion, whatever his name is, the guy kind of, the boss of Mina Murray, who gets them all together. His line of the British Empire has always encountered difficulty in distinguishing its heroes and its monsters. And I thought there's no more perfect description of the British Empire.
Absolutely.
Like that's, and like you're saying, this comic is almost a pastiche of the British Empire. And I would say to a comical level, because it's literally getting monsters to do their dirty work for them. And ultimately do good and save lives.
Which the British Empire did not do.
Well, I mean, in the sense that they were stopping British people from being killed while invading countries, you could say that. But one thing, like the Avengers and the Justice League parallel is one thing, but in more recent years, I don't think this was intentional. I think this was like a byproduct of how we wrote it. But there's, in later superhero in Marvel and DC, you have like the best one, most known example is the Suicide Squad. So that is getting
we're some kind of Suicide Squad.
Exactly.
I've not seen it. I only know that line.
I mean, he doesn't talk out of his mouth. He's like, what are we, some kind of Suicide Squad? So I got no teeth. Old man Will Smith. I got his teeth in.
Old Will Smith is kind of old man Will Smith now.
Yeah, but he's Hollywood, so he looks younger.
He does still, yeah. He's aged well.
Yes. But so there's a common thing where they get the enemies or villains together and force them to do good, and this is very much that as well. But this is like well before. I mean, there might have been Suicide Squad comics before then, potentially, for all I know.
Find out.
Suicide Squad, I think, is the most famous one. There's like Marvel ones called the Thunderbolts, which was definitely later on, and villains either willingly or unwillingly, more famously Suicide Squad, unwillingly, because they put a bomb in their necks to make them do what they needed to be done. But this is very much that kind of vibe as well, of let's get people who are evil, essentially, and get them to do good. Just make them do good, because we don't care about them.
Do you want your mind blowing?
When was the first Suicide Squad?
Before we put a man on the moon.
Wow, really?
Yeah, it was the Suicide Squad debuted in The Brave and the Bold, number 25.
Wow.
In 1959.
Damn, that is so. Yeah, Alan Moore might have been heavily influenced by that for this then.
Possibly, yeah.
But so that was very much we don't care about villains, so let's get them in and just literally put a bomb in them and make them do what we want. And also, because it was like Black Ops type stuff, the idea is that if they got caught doing something they shouldn't be doing, like disposing a dictator or whatever, then they could just be like, if they didn't kill him, or if they killed them, be like, what's this villain doing? Like, I don't know, villain shit. Like, who knows what? Who could explain why villains do what they do? Like, that
absolutely.
Kind of like right off. So it was kind of that, but in this instance, it was like people with special skills who just, they could barter with them to be like, we'll give you your freedom, or we'll help you find a cure for your invisibility, or whatever, if you do what we need doing, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And there's a weird kind of coming together of the team, and you root for them, despite the fact that two of them are explicitly evil, I would say. To more of a degree, and this was a point I was going to make, was in those Suicide Squad and Thunderbolts and all that, they're just general villains. Like, superhero villains are kind of the worst you get typically. And obviously there's worse instances, but typically it's like, I killed some people. Like, it's that kind of general. Like, I blew up a building, or like, you kill people, whatever. Like, you scamp kind of reaction. Whereas this, Hyde is murdering women. Like, he's literally... I don't know is he stalking them as Hyde, or is he meeting them as Jekyll and then turning into Hyde?
He's meeting them as Jekyll and then turning into Hyde, which is not the way that Jekyll operates in the novel.
No.
Jekyll tries to sequester himself in the novel, and what you find is actually it's more of a breaking out of Hyde. This is something that I find really fucking interesting. Is that Hyde operates the same way the Hulk operates.
Yes.
He has used Hyde to make an Incredible Hulk for him. To the extent that he's made him simian.
Yes, for climbing walls and being more accessible.
He's described as an orangutan.
Yes.
He's made him simian.
Do you think that's part of like a de-evolution kind of, or like a de-evolution of the physical, if that makes sense?
Possibly, and that's very present in Hyde, but in the original text, Hyde is described as being repulsively ugly and deformed, small, shrunken, and hairy. Whereas here we get a representation of Hyde as this great hulking, I use that word very, very carefully, beast.
Yeah.
He has taken Hyde and said, I need an Incredible Hulk.
Yeah, literally.
Because that would be really useful here. I'll use Jekyll and Hyde.
And he explains it with like one kind of throwaway line, which is that obviously, as you say, in the original text, Hyde was smaller and like he was meant to represent like the bad of man. So like, but the physical matching the internal. See, he was ugly and deformed and everything.
And the way that they did that was to give him a disability.
Yes,
to make him deformed, which again, very typical of Victorian literature.
Yes,
this is a trope that is common throughout Victorian literature. Is that ugliness and decay. Again, see also the portrait of Dorian Gray.
And the with this as well, how it's explained is a throwaway line from Jekyll where he points out that the more he became Hyde, the Hyde took from him like the physicality. So in this instance, they did start out like the novel, and then as he became Hyde more, Hyde became stronger and Jekyll became weaker. Then to the point where Jekyll points out they used to be taller. So he's literally taking. But the thing is, it's not kind of equal because Jekyll's still a man and Hyde's become a Hulk.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It's definitely disproportionate, but that's meant to be the general explanation.
Yeah.
But so Hyde is, I mean, Jekyll's kind of like the enabler of evil. He's not really evil himself, but he's like, and he doesn't need the potion anymore. So he's even more hulkish because it's from stress, isn't it?
Yes.
Like, which is exactly the Hulk. So whereas before it was a potion or was it vial or whatever it was.
It was a serum
Yes.
that he'd made, but he didn't need it for every transformation.
Well then, so that's continuing from the book then.
He has more control over the transformations here though.
Well, yes, exactly, yeah.
Because he can Hulk out when needed.
Yes, for the sake of the convenience of the story.
And that is plot armor, isn't it? That's
Yes.
all that is. That's plot armor.
Exactly. And that's that kind of one where you set your own rules at the beginning and then you just have to follow them as you go along.
And you have to suspend disbelief because that's the role that he is.
Yeah.
He's your paladin with 20 AC, isn't he?
Yes. And like the Hulk of the team has become its own trope as well, hasn't it? Like we need a Hulk. Like,
yeah.
But so Hyde, as he's really the main part of that contribution to the team. He is evil because, as I said, if he's starting out as Jekyll, he's like turning into Hyde, seeing a woman, just going, "Well, I'll just rip her head off." So and the fact that it's much more insidious than like a bank robber who's killed people while robbing banks.
Yeah,
because I feel like as an audience, we can in fiction we can excuse like random killing or killing for greed where it's not personal. We can excuse it if it's not personal.
We can excuse it in the anti-heroes that we have in our culture.
Exactly.
Think of the fucking craze.
Yeah. But then, but that we excuse because they're all so bad. Like, they were all bad to each other.
Yeah, they were all gangsters.
Yeah, but we can, in comics and stuff, we can more excuse like innocent bystanders because we never see or know the bystanders, and we just know later like, he's killed people while, you know, robbing banks or being a supervillain or blah blah blah. Whereas this, and I think this is like a credit to Alan Moore, he really makes the monsters who become the necessary evils. Really makes the monsters from the start, like with Hyde and especially with Griffin the Invisible Man, who is also discovered essentially raping women. Like that's where they find it.
Raping children.
Yeah. I didn't even click that, and that's terrific.
He's raping schoolgirls.
Yes. So Alan Moore's really making them evil from the start. So then when it gets to the end, and I don't think I think as a teenager, being a desensitized teenager, when I first read it, I was a teenager, early 20s, around that time. But when I first read it, I was kind of a bit like, yeah, well, they're evil, but, you know, like, it's... I think being desensitized, you don't think of the implications of what they're doing. And now, as an older reader, I just hated Griffin the whole time. Hyde kind of changes... Not changes. I mean, he changes in volume 2, but we're only talking about volume 1 for now.
Yeah.
He changes as he goes along, but he doesn't continue that streak of violence. It's never really explained. Whereas what Griffin's doing is even more insidious, I think, than what Hyde was doing, because that's like, sexual gratification in terms of like violence and all that. It makes his character so despicable. Like, in a way that's, for me now at this age, just unforgivable. So like by the end, I'm like, Griffin's still a fucking piece of shit.
Yeah, and he does nothing. I mean, there's nothing that a character can do to redeem themselves, but also the redemption arc is a trope that exists in literature. But there is no redemption arc for...
No, exactly. And again, getting way ahead of ourselves, but volume 2, it's something else what happens to him there. So
we'll talk about volume 2 here, I think.
Yeah, we'll get there. Yeah, we want to space out our Alan Moore because we want to ration out our Alan Moore discussions just to keep it going for as long as possible. Like, let's span it out. Yeah, he's not writing anything new. We already know that much. Eventually, we're gonna have to do his masterclass and just review that. But print out like the written text of it all and with some doodles, so it's kind of like a comic.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, so the characters like Hyde, Griffin, pretty despicable, one more than the other. Quatermain is a real interesting one because not only is he the reluctant hero, but he just hates Mina for being a woman, essentially, or a woman specifically who bosses him around, and he's so not used to that. He's almost like a very good representation of like the old and the new of the 90s when it came out. Because at that point, you probably still had people who thought like that. And you had a kind of newer wave of people who didn't think like that. And he was definitely, I mean, you've always had that to an extent in any decade. But he definitely feels like the old guard.
So do you know much about the novels that he appeared in?
Literally zero. I wasn't even sure if he was a pre-existing character or not.
Yeah, and we had this conversation, didn't we? And I did a bit of reading. They are not... So, again, I have an English degree. And so I'm relatively familiar with British Victorian literature because that is something that's stuffed down your throat when you do an English degree.
Of course.
And I wasn't familiar with Haggard. So it's from a novel called King Solomon's Mines. And then it has one sequel, which is of which Quatermain is the eponymous hero. And then there is a whole series of prequel novels displaying his exploits. He's a hunter.
Right.
So he's a hunter and a soldier. And so within the context of that background, it kind of makes sense that he would be a misogynist. He's a masculinist.
And especially from that time period, like 100%. So he's by the standards of the setting, he's just a normal guy. And what I find funny in a kind of warped way is how him and Nemo become more familiar and friendly with each other over their shared sexism and racism. They're just like, oh, you're like me, but just on the other side.
And they're the two characters that you would expect dislike each other the most, with Quatermain being a British soldier.
Yes.
And Nemo being essentially an early iteration of an Indian with anti-colonial feeling.
Yeah. I love the backstory of Nemo because, so I've not read anything from the original. It's the 10,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
10,000 Leagues Under the Sea,
yes.
Which I'm familiar with, but not overly familiar with.
So without having read it, my assumption of it was that it was just a fantastical voyage. Like, here's a man who's built a magical submarine and we're going to go deep underwater and blah. So I don't know how much of, I'm guessing it is part of the original text, that he's like a massive anti-British fighter for India, right?
Yeah, I haven't read it 15 years ago. Like, it's one of those that I read as a schoolboy. And so I'm not super familiar with it anymore.
I like how, I think he's got a great backstory because he has that kind of like, he was feared by the British. And so bringing him along, he's considered at one point worse by Cormain, worse than Hyde.
Yeah.
Because I actually noted down the text of it. And if I just gonna find it now. So at one point, Quatermain literally says, Nemo's worse than Hyde. And he says, someone else says Nemo's worse than Hyde. And Quatermain says, I agree. Hyde can be persuaded. Nemo can't. Yeah. And literally, I read that line. I went, what are you talking about? Like, you've literally, not only have you persuaded both, like they're both on the team, but if I was like, hey, you need to persuade either Nemo or Hyde to do something, I'm like, Nemo every day. Like, he's a bloke. Like, he's a bloke on the wrong side of a war. Hyde is a literal monster who murders people. Jesus.
So Nemo at the end of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, not 10. It's heavily suggested that Nemo had to go into undersea exile after his family was slaughtered by a powerful imperialist nation. I wonder who they were talking about.
Just one of the many powerful imperialist nations that were around at the time.
I mean,
there's so many. Who could possibly narrow down the list to which one?
So yeah, the original character was an anti-imperialist,
right?
And so it kind of makes sense. I don't think it's ever explicitly stated that he is Indian and the imperial nation that he is running from are the British. But within the context, it wasn't exactly a leap of faith for Alan Moore to characterize him as such. And
it's good that Alan Moore used that to the benefit of the story, because if it was only hinted at in the original text, then him bringing it just to the forefront in a very applicable way. And it gives him this interesting background, and like Quatermain keeps referring to be like, well, we are doing this for country, and Nemo's like, fucking you are, like, I ain't. Like, I don't know, I actually can't remember off the top of my head why he agrees to it. I think they would give him some pardon or something, maybe.
Something else that's really worthy of note here, and again, it's something I've just discovered. I should have done this research beforehand. Not a British novel.
Oh, to 20,000 Leagues?
Yeah, it's written by a bloke called Jules Verne. It's a French novel.
Okay, I mean, it's close enough.
It's a French novel with an undercurrent theme of fuck the British from the late Victorian era.
Well, the French always like that, and so. And it's okay, we could say that because it's fun to make fun of the French.
Yeah, it's fun to make fun of the French in a very friendly, we like the French really way.
Well, do we? But anyway, that's Nemo is a very interesting character. I like that he's just like, his thing is technology, so he's almost like the Tony Stark, but just with a submarine.
Absolutely.
Only. Cormain and him like get along well. They get along. They understand each other towards the end.
Yeah,
there's a great moment where they have to share a room at the girls' boarding school.
Yes. And
there's one bed, and Quatermain's like, well, I guess me and Nemo will have to share these two beds, and Miss Murray, you're going to have to sleep in the closet. And then the next panel is him and Nemo in the closet. He's like, women. It's like,
and Nick Quatermain's just sat on a chair looking really miserable.
Exactly. Now, I think we're going through most of the main cast. Mina Murray is an amazing character.
Oh, Mina Murray holds the whole thing together.
So, like, one of the most capable of the entire series.
Yeah.
So, like, she's the one who's literally, like, managing them without even them realizing they're being managed, other than just complaining about taking orders from a woman every once in a while.
And what's fascinating, I think what makes her so interesting, is that actually, if we're talking about the characterization of Mina Murray from Bram Stoker's Dracula, she had done a lot that was noteworthy. And actually, she'd done a lot which would have been worthy of Quatermain's respect.
Right.
Do you know much? Do you know the story of Dracula?
I know. I literally read like a Wikipedia blur of the plot, so I know generally that her and her husband and they meet up with Van Helsing and they kind of all band together to kill. But she gets kidnapped by Dracula as well, doesn't she?
No. Well, yeah, kind of. Dracula drinks her blood, and then he infects her, and she's able to become cured through basically her own volition. But one of the things that is present in her characterization is that she is very smart and very capable. And John Hawkins is a fucking idiot.
Right.
John Hawkins, like, there's this scene in Dracula where John Hawkins is trying to shave. And Dracula comes up behind him and he realizes that he can't see Dracula in the mirror. And the mirror smashes. And his takeaway from that is that he can't have a bloody good shave anymore. And so he's just realized that this guy who has him entrapped in a creepy castle has no reflection. And his main concern is that he's going to come out of this incident a little bit stubbly.
Which is the worst possible of that time. Like, you'd be cast out if you were anything more than a 5 o'clock shadow, obviously.
Yeah, unless you're a navalman.
Yes, because they're allowed to have tattoos and all that.
Yeah, no, they loved a good tattoo.
Yeah,
from the Orient.
Where'd you get this? Abroad?
Yeah, literally, yeah. I went to Japan and somebody tattooed me.
Nowadays, it's lads coming back with tribal tattoos. Like, what does it mean? It means peace and love in their culture. Like,
well, it's Eddie, Prince Albert, and George VI were very famously tattooed.
Really?
Yeah, when Eddie was 14, Queen Victoria and Edward VII sent them on a 3-year world tour with the Navy. So they were adolescents. They went, just fuck off with the Navy for 3 years. And they went to Japan and both found the tattooing there really fascinating. And so they both got inked. And so yeah, George the Sixth, very stoic George the Sixth, World War I George the Sixth was riddled with tattoos.
And there must have been the old version with like a needle and like a light tapping into the skin, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's a needle on a bamboo stick, which they would tap in with a hammer.
Right.
They would literally tap it in with a mallet.
Because the ink needs to get past the external layer of skin to the under.
It needs to get through the outer dermis, yeah.
And just the worst tattoo of like, what is it meant to be? Like, it's a butterfly. Oh, look, stretching the skin out. Like, you can see it now. Like, geez.
Well, they both had tattoos in the very traditional Japanese style. I don't know what their specific tattoos were, but it would have been koi fish and tigers and dragons and waves and cherry blossoms and that kind of stuff.
Fair. I'm just seeing the time, so we definitely need to get back on track with the League of Gentlemen.
Sorry.
No, it's all right. Like, this is what the viewers keep coming back for. If
this
they,
is
if
what
they
everyone
do.
loves.
Exactly. I think a big spanning theme that would be good to get across is...
Talk about broad themes.
Well, I think the broadest one is, and this feeds also into just a larger conversation itself, is how much do you excuse racism and sexism of characters who are from a time where that is 100% what they would be like if they were real in that time.
Yes.
So I've like most of my notes on other comics we've done is like, I like when this part happened. Ooh, I like they did this, or I like when this character did this, whatever. Most of my notes from here are just written horrible things that characters have said. Yeah. And just being like, again, like when I was saying earlier about low and high fantasy, I would describe this definitely as low fantasy. So the point is, what is 17th century Britain like? 19th? Yeah, 19th. I always go the wrong way.
What I'm here for.
Well, so I just edited in the dings on the Pokemon Adventures one where you just kept calling it a comic or a game, and I kept correcting you to manga. managed to find a third party like royalty-free ding to put into it, and the first couple is just ding and then nothing happens. It's only like the fourth instance where I'm like, I think I'm going to put a ding in those earlier ones. So if I keep doing it, we'll do the same for me.
Yeah.
But so yeah, in the 19th century, like what England was at the time, and if you had these characters, they would have been all the bad things. Yes. So it becomes that. How much is it of the author? And I don't mean Alan Moore specifically. I'm not like ragging on him, but just generally, how much do you put that down to an author? It's like, well, you've written it as fiction, so you could do anything. But then is that excuse? And I don't want to say excuse like that's the other side of the argument. Is it an excuse where you say, well, it's low fantasy, so I had to put all the sexism and racism in and then make them say all these horrible things?
So this is purely based on his whole corpus. Based on the rest of Alan Moore's work, I would argue that actually he isn't. He doesn't revel in writing misogynistic or racist characters.
Yeah, and I would agree that. I again, I'm not putting anything on more specifically.
I think here it's relevant to the cultural and socioeconomic environment that he's placed these characters in.
Yes.
And actually, it would be really jarring if Quatermain and Nemo responded positively to taking orders from a woman.
Yes, exactly.
We're talking about, particularly with Quatermain, we're talking about a character here who has had this experience of war. He was galvanized in war, which is such, in that era, a really masculinist exploit. It's men being men. It's men being manly men with other men.
And even today, even though women being in war and being in the military and everything is widely accepted, as it should be, the act is still considered quite masculine.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? And so I think one of the things that you have to... It's contextual, isn't it? And we have to consider the context within which these things are being said and done.
Yes.
And actually, they're not character aspects that we're being asked to celebrate.
Yes, and that's one of the most important things, I think, that makes this work, and for any text. And it does get missed sometimes in the more, and I hate using this word to describe it as a side of an argument, but the more woke side of it, and that's coming from someone who considers themselves woke.
Yeah.
Or tries to be at the very least. But the extreme of that side is well, if it's fiction, why can you just make them say or do anything? Or why did you have to be that realistic? You've already given them powers, or you've already have characters with powers. Why can you? And the defense is, and I 100% on the side of the defense, but I still find it interesting, seeing that from both sides. But the defense is, I wanted it to be this setting, but with these fantastical elements. Yeah,
and I think if you had sanitized those characters and aligned them with a modern, acceptable viewpoint, they wouldn't have been rounded, believable characters. And do I think that because I would like to live in a world without sexism, we shouldn't portray sexists and misogynists in fiction? I would argue that actually accurate portrayals of misogynists is valid because these people exist. They walk among us.
Yes, 100%.
These people still exist. And so actually it would be disingenuous not to represent them in fiction. I think what's interesting is when you start to choose who you celebrate.
Yes, and that in itself does become its own problem because there's characters who, just across literary and fiction and media, there's characters who should not be celebrated and are. One of the...
Andrew Tate!
I was going to bring it around, actually. I was going to say one of the most common in comic books is Rorschach from Watchmen.
Oh, yeah.
Who Alan Moore specifically was like, I hate the fact that people like him. He's meant to be vilified. He's meant to be like not good at all.
Well, there's meant to be something almost inhuman about Rorschach.
Yeah, and there's a literal scene where he loses his humanity. Yeah. And I don't think he uses those words, but he basically describes it.
That's what happens, isn't it?
Yeah, the night he became Rorschach.
Yeah, and it's such a like the visual language that's used in those panels is so fucking vivid and on the nose.
Exactly.
It couldn't. If you're reading it with anything towards a critical eye, it couldn't be more clear.
Yes.
That's what Alan and whoever the artist was for Watchmen are trying to get across. And again, I think with the misogyny that's inherent with some of these characters, they are not the aspects of those characters that you're meant to celebrate. I don't know that there is anything about these characters that you're meant to celebrate.
Well, like, as it comes back to, Quatermain and Nemo are the most potential for not even like redemption, but just not being as much of a curmudgeon assholes.
Yeah.
But then he's made a very good like scale of like how much evil can they do beforehand and be accepted afterwards. So I feel like by the end of the first volume, you come around more on Quatermain and Nemo. Hyde is just further away from the shit he did. Yes. And that's the only kind of like, and you don't want that to be the only reason that he's more tolerated or liked or whatever. Griffin is just always an asshole. Yeah. So you're never that far away from what he did. But I think was good. And the good point you made earlier, and I think this is very important to modern literature and media and everything, is the characters are meant to be celebrated. They're meant to be vilified, or like in comedy, you're meant to like laugh at the characters, not with them. That's the bit. My favorite reference is Always Sunny in Philadelphia. They do the worst things because they are the worst characters. Yes. That's the joke.
And that's what's interesting here is that we're presented. It's a great representation of the anti-hero.
Yes. And again, you have such a scale to choose from. I said I've got some of the quotes that I found particularly interesting or egregious. You decide. Okay. You decide which.
Can I decide which on a one-by-one basis?
Sure. Yeah. So first one from Mr. Bond. Now I thought this is interesting because of not only the character backstory that's hinted, but also the way that it's viewed as in society. But Mr. Bond implies Miss Murray is far beyond the social pale, being ravished by a foreigner and all that. Quite against your will, of course. But then, people do talk so, don't they?
Yeah.
I thought that was such like a explanation of backstory and how she's viewed in modern society.
But, yeah, and so I think you found that one egregious.
Definitely.
But doesn't it reflect more on him than her?
I think it reflects more on society than her, for sure.
Victorian propriety.
Yeah, because she's nothing that he's described there was her choice at all. And he goes so far as to say ravished by a foreigner, quite against your will, but then the implication of just because it was against your will doesn't mean the rest of the world's going to see it that way, and that's the problem with society at the time.
And you know, he's characterized as being a fat man in a fucking nice suit with a big hat.
Extremely representative of upper class society.
Absolutely. And so instantly that paints that tells me everything I need to know about him.
Yes.
It put me straight in mind of the Victorian mill owner.
Yes. And it gives you her backstory, but in a way where you have to really, you just have to lift the veil of like, oh, this is what actually has happened, but this is how society's viewed it.
And this is, I think, what I was getting at earlier, which is that actually Mina's backstory is the one that is elucidated the least.
Yes.
And that makes her such, in this context, a fascinating character. Like, I imagine if you hadn't read Bram Stoker's Dracula,
you'd have no idea.
Coming out of this, you'd go, I'm going to read that book. What happened to Mina Murray?
Yeah, no, definitely. More so than the other characters. And that almost, I think that almost kind of speaks as well to like the fact that no one bothers about her backstory. I don't mean that Alan Moore didn't, but I mean literally in the story, everyone else is like, oh, he's done this and he's done that, and oh, he got up to this. Murray's like, who's that? It's like, I don't know, some chick. Like, it's literally that's how they kind of react to it.
But he's the first one. She's the first one he found.
Yeah.
And and again throughout the first volume, she displays herself to be competent time and time again.
Yes. Oh, yeah. She's, again, the most capable, the most competent. She is the Captain America of the team, I would say.
There we go. I was wondering who she would be.
Yeah, she's the leader, but without the respect of her peers, which is even harder task.
So is she Captain America or is she Samuel Jackson?
Captain America because she's in the
thick of it.
So it would be Bond would be the Samuel Jackson type almost, because he he's from the behind the scenes instructing them. Like that would be his kind of comparableness. I suppose Quatermain to an extent is a kind of Captain America as well, but more because of his skill set,
his physicality.
Yes, exactly.
Almost makes him more of a what's his name, the bow and arrow guy,
Hawkeye.
Yes. And again, Quatermain. That's a really good analogy. They're quite analogous because they don't have powers.
Yeah, exactly.
And so Mina almost has these powers because she survived and came back from that vampiric experience. Yes,
but as far as we know, she doesn't have any supernatural or powers or anything.
No.
What's we got next? So this one I thought was a good one as well. Nemo. towards the beginning of the story.
Yeah.
If I must have a woman on my ship, it is preferable they are alive, I think.
Yeah, no,
like,
I remember that one.
What are you hinting at? Jesus.
He's not sure. He's just not sure.
I feel like with that's him trying to be flippant. Like he's not giving away anything about his character. I think he's literally trying to be a bit of an asshole in the situation.
A joke, isn't it?
Yeah, of course, it's a horrible joke. But I think, in the setting, that was probably like a bloody rip-roarer. That was.
Yeah, absolutely. That went down great.
Yeah, that was probably one of the first instances the Quartermain was like, I think this newer guy's all right. I was thinking the same thing.
I was skeptical at first.
Oh, you hate her as well? Like, oh my god. Did we just become best friends? Like that. Step brothers. I think we've put more into the Quartermain Nemo friendship than is actually in the text. I think we've shipped them in a weird way.
Yeah, I think we might have done.
Oh, I have, admittedly.
Alan, if you're listening, can we get a post League of Extraordinary Gentlemen Nemo Quartermain spin-off?
Well, there's possible reasons why that could or could not happen, related to even past volume 2, volume 3 kind of onwards, where some of the characters in it, some are not, but we'll get to that.
I suppose the passage of time necessitates that some of them aren't in it anymore.
Exactly, yeah. I can't remember. Oh yeah, this was another Nemo classic.
Oh,
Madam, that's enough. I pray God that all Englishwomen are not now of your manly ilk.
I remember that one. And it's so interesting because her femininity is questioned so many times.
But literally because she's giving orders. Like that's the only reason.
But remember when she meets the schoolmaster and she says, oh, you have such a robust womanly frame. And it's like, what does that mean? What do you mean by a robust womanly frame?
Yeah, exactly.
Or it's words to that effect. I forget the exact quote.
Something like that. I might have it actually later in the list, but I thought the fact that this is a very blunt way of putting it, but the token woman character dressing as the hooker for bait.
Yeah, but she did it.
Yes,
she made that choice.
That was going to be my other point. Was on the one hand, that's like a serious thing, like a whole story point, but on the other hand, she is literally like, right, we need a hooker. I'm getting dressed up. Like, as soon as he gets out here, bloody shoot him or whatever. Like she's like, right, this is the plan. This is what we're doing.
And then Quartermain fucks off to a pharmacy to buy more skag.
Yeah, he again, that plays in the point. She's capable, and at the time, Quartermain not that capable because he's jonesing for a hit. Like he's absolutely unreliable to the worst extent in that moment. Yeah, to the point where she almost dies.
Yeah, well, yeah.
So I think that's a good representation of like the male character isn't just suddenly saving the day. He gets there like towards the end. Yeah,
and
just
that's also the point where Jekyll picks her up and turns into Hyde. Now,
well, she goes back to a room as Jekyll, and then he turns as Hyde.
Yeah. So is this an instance where Jekyll is just trying to find some companionship and Hyde comes out every once in a while?
Well,
or is Jekyll actively sourcing women for Hyde?
This was my point earlier, was like, I initially was on the worst side. I was like, oh, he's like stalking and killing women. And then only now we're talking about it, I'm like, well, what was it? And I'm not saying it's definitely not excusable in any sense, but you got to wonder the intention of the alter ego, one versus the other.
And it's left ambiguous, I think.
Yes, exactly.
It's left ambiguous as to what is actually happening there. And possibly we're reading more into it than was there, but I think that's part of examining a text.
Exactly, and that's part of the fun as well. Like, Moore does leave room for this interpretation, and then he gets mad when people make adaptations and they get the wrong idea. It's like, no, I didn't mean that.
What did you mean?
Well, you still got to work out for yourself. But I can't tell you, but I'm mad you got it wrong.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
God, I hope Moore likes us when we eventually meet him.
And it's because I think of Moore's other sexually aggressive male characters.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the one who looks like Wolverine in Watchmen.
The comedian.
The comedian.
Yes. Who is also a shit bloke.
A terrible human being, but a straight up and down rapist.
Yes. Yeah.
There is no ambiguity in the comedian's proclivities in that area.
Nope.
He fucking tried to rape a woman, and he also forcibly impregnated that Vietnamese woman.
Yep.
He is just straight up and down a rapist.
Yes. And he's never redeemed. But the point of the end of The Watchmen is how good a character can in Silk Spectre can come from the chaotic evil of the comedian and his actions. And that's what inspires Dr. Manhattan to be like, I guess I'll save the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, no, and the comedian needed to be the character that he was for that story to work.
Yeah.
But he's not a character that you are ever encouraged to align yourself with.
No.
Whereas Jekyll, it's a bit more ambiguous with Jekyll, isn't it?
I think on the one hand, Jekyll kind of skirts the line between sympathetic and pathetic.
Yeah, which is very much in line with his original characterization in the novel.
Exactly. And he starts off as a really decent bloke, isn't he? Like, he's a kind of revered, like, liked, like, he's a handsome or at least normal man.
He's a handsome doctor.
Yes. And then he indulges in being Hyde. And even though physically it takes a toll, it's the act of being evil is like a release for him. And it's the temptation of evil or evil acts, isn't it?
Yeah. So Jekyll's relationship with Hyde is the thing that you are encouraged to write about when you write about Jekyll and Hyde at degree level.
Right.
The interplay between those two characters and what they represent is very much the central focus of the novel. But Jekyll becomes a reclusive. He sequesters himself from society.
Right.
Removing yourself from society in the Victorian era is a death in and of itself. When I say society, I mean eating nice meals in drawing rooms with other rich people.
Yeah.
And refusing the society of the right people and choosing the society of the wrong people. It's Dorian Gray's downfall.
And that should always be the at the time, should always, and even today, that should always be the goal of everyone according to them. Like, you should always aspire to be part of this, the 1%, essentially.
Absolutely, yeah. And in the culture of Victorian Britain, it's so important. We think about the poets that we revere from the Victorian era.
Yeah.
They are the people who were invited to society but not accepted.
Do you think there was points in that time where someone was like, oh my God, I haven't seen John in a couple of weeks. I think he sequestered himself from society. Like, gee, I miss him. And then the next day, it's like, you all right? It's like, where have you been? It's like, oh, I went on a ship. Like, I went on holiday. Like,
and that happened.
We thought you died.
Yeah, and that
not literally, but societally.
Yeah, but you think like we talk about Oscar Wilde and Lord Byron. These two fascinating figures.
I mean, they were a bit of character, weren't they?
They kind of were, but. Yeah, they were invited into society, but not accepted by it.
Right.
And so the idea of somebody like Jekyll, who had that open invitation into Victorian society and was accepted and liked,
and then choosing to go away from it, but isn't that also the kind of the not the plot, but like the meaning is that like it was a bad thing for him to turn down high society?
No, he did it out of fear.
Right.
He did it out of fear. So he was refusing engagements and he was sequestering himself out of fear for what Hyde would do. He was he was entrapping himself. He was trying to trap Hyde. But it was one of the deaths that Jekyll died.
Yeah, it kind of an early metaphor for like social anxiety almost, or like depression. Like,
fuck yeah, no. I think probably now, you could with the focus that we have on mental health now, you could probably do a reading.
Yeah.
You could probably do a reading.
And you could say like that could have been influenced without the author even realizing. Like,
yeah, I mean,
because it was something that happened to people.
So there's readings about homosexuality, which you can do, and you can subject Jekyll and Hyde to a really, really, really extensive reading along those lines. And it's one of the ways you can examine the text. And I imagine that would actually be a 20th century reading that's being imposed on a Victorian text, which is one of the things that we do.
Yeah.
It's one of the ways that texts live on, is that we see things in them that relate to our current cultural obsessions.
Yeah.
But
new examinations, new interpretations.
Exactly, yeah. Absolutely. But yeah, I think Jekyll is an interesting character in this text, and the way that he's been translated over is interesting as well.
Yeah. Another very smart, very capable move by Miss Murray.
Yeah.
She is the one that uses the paint to display Griffin, the Invisible Man.
Yes.
And that such an early trope of what would become like so well used in every kind of iteration. And Scooby-Doo, exactly. But she was just literally like, hey, there's paint. Like, she was the only one who thought of it. Bloody Quatermain and Nemo are trying to capture and wrestle a invisible man in a almost pitch black room.
Yes.
And she's like, I see a shortcut here. I'm going to take it. So again, like those were one of the moves I saw, and I was like, she's so smart. Like she really is she's really undersold.
Again, character who had dealt with an insidious force that she couldn't see.
Yes, and yeah, she's so kind of underplayed in a way where I'm literally kind of on the edge of like, did Morn just not? Yeah. So I think this is a really intelligent display of a very capable, smart. I keep saying capable. That is the most like a very resourceful character in Murray, but it's so underplayed in the story. But Moore is giving her these key moments of like, if it weren't for her, they'd have been fucked.
But what's fascinating is that they're all contextually sound. And so what Moore has done here is taken one of the characters, not let you peek under the curtain of what their backstory is, but brought it into it in such a well-integrated, well-considered way that actually, once you think about Dracula a bit, you kind of go, yeah, it makes sense that Mina would have thought that. It makes sense for Mina to have been the first person to have reached that conclusion. But actually, he's done it in such a way that you kind of have to look for it.
And what's interesting as well is it's one of those things where like, it's not that she went through the whole Dracula thing and then it made her this way. I think it's that she survived the Dracula thing. She was one of many potential victims, but then no, she could have been one of many victims, but her resourcefulness is what made her survive. And now she continues that role. So
and she was a driving force.
Yeah. And that's a really early, like female-led, like female protagonist, like Bram Stoker's Dracula.
She wasn't a protagonist. I think I would still argue that Hawkins was the protagonist,
even though he's a bumbling idiot.
But it was her that killed Dracula.
Yeah,
it was her that facilitated Van Helsing in killing Dracula. And without her, Dracula wouldn't have been vulnerable.
Yeah,
it was her that kind of she was the person who developed an understanding of Dracula's vulnerabilities. And again, that is the same trait that she displays throughout this text.
Yes,
is that it's often her, it's her that kind of discovers each character's vulnerability.
It's interesting to think, did Moore intentionally make her resourceful because of how he liked her in the book, or did he interpret her as resourceful in the original text and think, oh, I have to make her that because that's what she was?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's a bit of both. Like, I mean, he could have changed it if he wanted.
And she strikes me, often writers will have a mouthpiece within their text. Tyrion in Game of Thrones, Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings.
Stand in for the author.
Exactly, yeah, absolutely. Sam Vimes in the Discworld novels is another great example of the author having a character through which they will voice their own feelings and opinions. And Mina kind of feels like...
I mean, she's the best character, so obviously he's like, oh, I'll be that one. I'll be the best one.
But she has this common sense approach and this pragmatism that feels like it's... she is the impetus for a lot of the resolutions that Moore sees to the problems he's created.
Yeah.
And so on some level, I kind of feel as though she's his mouthpiece.
There's definitely an interpretation there for sure. But to an extent, you could say any series that has a good character or a capable, resourceful character is probably the author as well.
Yeah.
Or the authors afterwards to be like, yeah, I'm that one. who's the best one? Yeah, I'm that one.
Yeah, I'm the one that everyone likes.
Who do you think's the best one? Yeah, I'm that one. And it's such a Moore thing to do, I don't think. A few more notes. A quote from Quatermain, which I had my own interpretation, which is, so his line was, infuriating woman, like my first wife in a lot of ways. And I read that and I thought, no wonder they got Sean Connery for the film. So one thing that I forgot to mention, which for the reason we're doing in the first place, I love the art. I love the illustrations.
Yeah,
I love it's like a cartoon, it's like a newspaper cartoon style, like those old satirical political cartoons, that kind of style, but with color,
made to look Victorian.
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
in a way that From Hell wasn't.
Yeah, From Hell was very newspaper strip comic style, wasn't it?
From Hell The Walking Dead reminded me of From Hell.
Just by being black and white?
No, in the way the character models were drawn.
Okay, fair enough.
And so From Hell is kind of that more gritty, realist art style.
Yes.
And then Watchmen very much looks like a comic book from the 1980s.
Yes.
But this has an art style all of its own. And initially I didn't enjoy it.
I think is why it's so memorable for me, because it's cartoons, comics that have their own unique art style. When you then think back to them, they're more vivid in your head. Whereas like DC and Marvel, they have their kind of templates that have to be reused over and over again.
There's a homogenous element.
And when you think of a bit, you just kind of think of like the actions, but you for me personally, I don't know if everyone else like this, but when it's the same style over and over again, you think of the actions in like, oh, and then this happened and this happened. But whereas with this, I can visualize in my head these specific panels because they're so memorable, because they're such a unique style.
Yeah, and it's colored beautifully.
Yes, and especially credit the part I most liked in respect to Kevin O'Neill, the bit where Quatermain and Jekyll are in the opium den.
Yes.
And they're almost getting caught out, or Quatermain almost is, and Quatermain's talking his way out of it. He's like, they're like, hang on, why are you saying this? Or like, you don't know this guy. And he's like, all right, I owe him a bit of money. Like, he doesn't know, I owe him, whatever. But all through this conversation, Jekyll's almost turning into Hyde, and you see Hyde features coming through in these like 6 panels. I thought it was so good how we got like the halfway between Jekyll and Hyde look in like the middle panels, and then how it goes back again, and like the color comes through a little bit as well, and his expression is like, you can see him like trying to keep it physically in line with the dialogue. So as soon as it's kind of like they're like, all right, fine, get out of here kind of thing, you seem like, oof, like calm down again.
Do you know I didn't notice it on the first pass?
Yeah, no, so I didn't when I first read it. It was only the second one.
Yeah, the visual language of it is stunning, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
And
I was looking at those facial expressions and the look, and I was just like, God, that O'Neill guy really
and
killed
again,
it.
I think this is something that I often feel about Moore, is that he's not a comic book writer because that's the medium he likes. He's a comic book writer because that's the medium that allows him to best tell the story he wants to tell.
Yeah.
And I really feel that here. I really feel as though this works as a comic book in a way it wouldn't work as a novel. And that's just one of the things that made me consider that, is that actually he used the visual language so well there.
And potentially that's a positive note you could prescribe to any great comic, like, because by virtue of being a great comic, it has to be a good use of
any comic that's doing it well.
Dialogue and actions against visual representation and panel layout. And like we said before, panel layout, you never really know who actually dictated it until you get the core scripts.
And isn't it nicely laid out?
Exactly, yeah. Good use of those 6 panels and those big 1 panels as well for like a big major shot as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
See any other notes? The art of Jekyll. So what we were saying, or I was saying before about the scale of like evil and like irredeemable actions.
Yeah.
There's a hard point that puts the end of the scale, because I think it's Quatermain or Murray describes Griffin is deemed as an incapable of suffering remorse.
Yeah.
And that's like the worst level. Because even Hyde, it's hard to say what Hyde only feels, but he's got the Jekyll aspect, which is very remorseful and sad of what he's done. So, and they are part of each other.
Whereas Griffin
is the most evil, psychopathic, and it's such a scary thing. Like the recent Invisible Man film kind of got this across well, but the fear of not just a monster or something that can harm you, but something with such sadistic intentions, and you can't see it.
Yeah, you can't see it, and it doesn't care if it hurts you.
Well, no, it wants to. It gets pleasure from hurting you. Like that's like the combination of the worst aspects of a creature. So where am I on the notes?
Notes.
This will be cut out as well. Maybe, I don't know. I'll see how I feel.
You never
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Oh, one other thing. This is noteworthy. Mainly, I mean, it's noteworthy in itself. The fact that Hyde can see Griffin.
Yeah.
And that plays a big part in volume 2.
Right, okay.
And I don't want to spoil anything, but it's huge.
Yeah, do you know what? I noticed that, and I don't really have developed feelings about it, do you?
I think at the like without if I didn't know volume 2, the most it should be taken at this stage is just that's interesting. Like that's the biggest at this level. When you get to volume 2, then you go and then
right, okay.
So that's noteworthy. I like this is a part of the whole larger theme that we were talking about before, but it's the part, and this technically spoilers, but I think we haven't really bothered with spoilers because there's not much. I don't say it's the end, it's not interesting. It's interesting. This is probably the most interesting aspect of the ending, right? So spoilers for the end. If you want to read volume 2, go out of your way to read it. It's a great piece of literature and comics and everything. But there's a point in the end where they're escaping the enemies. And I noted how when they're working together to escape, that's the moment where, despite all the evil shit that some of the characters have done and how unlikable they've been, that's the moment for me as a reader where I went, I'm rooting for them now.
Right,
to escape.
Galvanizes them as something that you can get behind.
Yeah. And in that moment, you forget how evil shit Griffin's done. Like, especially, that's the real mark. Like, I'm like, I hope they all get out. I didn't actively think, except Griffin. I hope he gets fucking killed.
Yeah.
Like, and it's not because I feel differently about Griffin. It's just that them working together as a unit. Because they get out in a very kind of like, let's hold on to hide. Quartermain uses his spear gun or whatever it is, and they work together to all get out.
Yeah.
And in that moment, because they're working together, you want them to be successful together.
Yeah.
And that's the power of good storytelling and like tension and like building suspense, and that's it's more at its finest. When you strip everything else away, more is great at just making you root. Not even necessarily for good characters, but just rooting for whoever the protagonist is.
Yeah.
And I wrote that as, despite the characters being monsters, it's still oddly entertaining to see them working together and then rooting for them.
Yeah.
Another line of Quartermain, it's all I can do to stop myself from giving her a jolly good smack sometimes. Definitely Connery.
Isn't it? Yeah. Do you know, because I'd never read this until we read it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I found it really interesting reading Quartermain's character that they had cast him beautifully.
Yes. And so if we mainly kind of move past talking about the original comic, it's worth still mentioning that the film adaptation, if only for the fact that it was one of my favorites as a kid. And
was it?
But so here it is. It's one of the things I had on VHS, and I was like a streaming. I was a person who benefited from like streaming content before that was a thing, because I would just watch VHSs over and over again.
Too.
So, and I think that was common for our for our age. But so this was one of them. This adaptation. This is well before I read the comic, so I didn't know anything about it.
Yeah,
it was only years later when I got the internet came about, and I got into the zeitgeist of it all, and it was like, this is the worst comic adaptation of all time. I was like, oh, geez, why? Like,
I really like it.
And it wasn't until years later after that I read the comic going, oh, yeah, the film sucks.
Yeah.
But I still have a affinity for it because, watching as a kid. Sean Connery, he only took the role because he passed on Gandalf beforehand.
Did he?
And he passed on a unspecified role in The Matrix. So he had 2 missed opportunities for just raking in money.
Who would he have been in The Matrix?
Well, that's the thing, we don't know for sure. So I don't know. It's only kind of reported on that he turned down a role in them. Maybe it might have been the room keeper thing in the second one, potentially.
He would have been a terrible Gandalf.
Yeah, probably, yeah. But so he missed out on these 2, and then when League of Gentlemen came along, he didn't even give a shit at all about the source thing. He was just like, oh, it's based on a comic. So it's like,
yes, I'll make sure I take this one.
Yeah, but he was like, it's based on something, it'll probably be a franchise, let's get in on it.
Bring me my woman beating stick. Yeah. I'm ready for it.
But you can tell have you seen the film?
Yeah, a long time ago.
So the changes they make, so it's widely regarded as being a shit adaptation because of some of the changes. It moves so far away from the original theme of like monsters being like real monsters coming together.
Yeah,
it makes everyone redeemable. So Quartermain is not an opium addict at all.
Okay,
he just retired to Africa,
right,
and to the point where like as a colonialist soldier, he's actually beloved by the locals.
Oh,
exactly. So it goes that far as well.
Fuck off.
Yeah.
That's stupid.
Griffin, one of the biggest differences as well. He's literally just like a scamp, and like the worst he does is I think he grabs Miss Murray's ass. Like that's the worst he does.
Okay.
And then the smart thing that the film does, I say smart. I think it was kind of necessary, but they make it look like Griffin is betraying the team, and then it turns out it's Dorian Gray. So
right, yeah, okay.
So obviously everyone's like, that's slimy Griffin, like because he's invisible, like we can't trust him. And then later it's like, oh no, he's actually like saved our ass, and he's like decent by the end.
Just for reference, would you like to know what the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen's to Rotten Tomatoes score is?
I'm gonna guess. I reckon it's around 19%.
Is that for the tomato meter or the audience score?
Tomato meter.
17.
Close, very close.
And then audience score?
To like 25.
44.
Oh, gee. Well, yeah, but there's a lot of dumb kids like me who watched it.
Yeah, probably. So it has a relatively high audience score.
Yeah.
But yeah, the critics' consensus was that it was poor. But critics are the kind of people that care how good an adaptation it is, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of them are meant to be film critics who don't read the original stuff. Like Mark Como is one of the guys I was to, and he's like, I don't read books or comics. Like,
I watch films.
Yes, I'm a film critic. I watch films. So he exclusively judges it on the film that it is.
Yeah,
and I think that's the best way to do it. If you're a film reviewer, the internet's gonna do all the comparisons to the original text. Yeah. One good change I think they made was making Mina Murray vampire, and I think that gives her a bit more,
gives her some powers.
Well, see, I used to think it was until my second reading that I had this opinion. I originally thought that gave her more in terms of having some powers and being a bit more like in the trenches with the fighting and stuff.
Yeah,
but now that I've read on the second viewing, I'm like, nah, she's really good and important and integral without powers.
Yeah, she's a great character.
So now I'm wondering, I think I've changed my mind on that aspect.
Yeah.
Shit change. They added Tom Sawyer because they needed an American in there.
So they added Tom Sawyer.
Yeah. And he's like Secret Service or something, or FBI or some bollocks. So he like used to be Tom Sawyer. He's grown up and now he's like a spy.
They might as well have just thrown fucking Gatsby in there.
Yeah, with what powers? Like
he's a bootlegger.
He throws the greatest party. It's like, like you literally can't stop partying when Gatsby
he was a cousin to the Kaiser and he once killed a man.
Yeah, well. How do you kill him? Just overdose on drugs I gave him?
It's a rumor about him.
A rumor about him?
Yeah, any Great Gatsby fan will know what I'm referencing.
This again, you're the literature guy. That goes way over my head. Like when I first mentioned Kevin Conroy and you were like, who? Like that's, but then you actually knew Kevin. I know very little about the Great Gatsby, other than the fact that he's called the Great Gatsby.
Gatsby was all right in the end.
Wait, was he?
It was what preyed on Gatsby. What foul dust trailed in the wake of his dreams.
Miss me with that literature shit. One good change I thought for the film, I think the last point, they make the antagonist not. So initially it looks like they do the same thing where it turns out it's, again, spoilers for the comic and for the film, it turns out it's Moriarty is the one who arranged them and is the bad guy who they have to beat in the end. In this, this is a panned change. I actually did enjoy this. It might be because I was a stupid kid when I first saw it, but so it's like, oh, this evil guy just called M is making machines and stuff, like tanks, and he's trying to start the war because he's invested in arms companies and he'll make money from World War II.
Which war?
World War, I think it's World War One. Yeah, I think he's trying to. This is like decades before, or a decade before. He's trying to start it artificially to benefit from it. So and tensions are higher already. So that's meant to be the point.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, because this is set in the fin de siècle era of Victorian history.
Yeah, so the film, I think the film is set a bit later.
Early 20th century.
Yeah. So, or I might be wrong. But basically, he's trying to start a war for his own profit. It then turns out that the character who's doing that is the same Moriarty who brought them together.
Yeah.
Because Moriarty, he's not making weapons to sell to the other sides.
Yeah.
He wants to make the League to sell to the other side.
Yeah, absolutely.
So he takes pieces from each of the members. So from Nemo, it's his literal blueprints and schematics for his technology. For Griffin, so this is the thing that gets a bit weird. He doesn't need to assemble all of them to get all this, I don't think. Griffin, they literally just need a bit of his skin. But it's like, you couldn't have just like found him and got that. Like he's there at the beginning. So it's like
just scalped him.
Yeah, you could just binned him off like before the start. You didn't need him there. Mina, they needed her blood. Again, could have just got that.
Yeah.
They could have just nicked that probably without all this kerfuffle. They needed Hyde's potions, so he's still on the potions in this film.
Makes sense.
And what I did like is they get Quatermain because they need Quatermain to hunt and capture Hyde.
Oh, that's what he's there for.
Exactly. And, you know, to be Sean Connery's payday, obviously. Or failed payday.
Yeah.
I mean, he probably got paid a bit, but, you know, definitely not as much. So, yeah, the film is worth checking out if you want to laugh. And, you know, it's a bit of fun, like a bit of fantasy fun. It's not good, but, you know, it's a bit of fun. One last thing I want to mention, which I thought you'd get a kick off as well, is I found this on the Wikipedia. So on the original Volume 1 publishing, they had to do a second press run on issue 5. And the reason they had to do a second press run is, this is straight from Wikipedia, the greatest source of information in this day and age.
Absolutely.
Issue 5 contained an authentic vintage advertisement for a Marvel brand douche. Marvel Comics is DC's chief competitive rival within the comics industry. And Moore had had a public dispute with Marvel before his public dispute with DC.
Yeah.
His former employer. This ad caused DC executive Paul Levitz to order the entire print run destroyed and reprinted with the offending advertisement edited.
Wow.
In a later title, Moore creates a Miracle Douche Recall headline on a newspaper, which is not only a reference to the previous thing, but it's also a reference to the Marvel Man when Marvel Comics previously retitled Marvel Man. I don't know. Which was written by Alan Moore to Miracle Man. So Alan Moore wrote a title, Miracle Man, they changed it to Marvel Man.
So he was joking about the recall.
Yes.
Oh, that's really fun.
That's one of the most fun, like light-hearted Alan Moore. Even though when he did it, he probably did with a lot of vitriol. A lot of hate in his heart. Which is the Alan Moore we all love.
I know, he's wonderful.
He's an amazing human being, and it's just so fun to make fun of him. Like,
I just love a wizardly writer.
I make fun of him because I will never, ever be as great a writer as he is. That is the ultimate truth.
Yeah, he is a wonderful writer, isn't he?
And he thinks he's a wizard. I mean, those two things are like...
I'm so excited to talk about From Hell.
So this was one thing I was going to mention. Like, so the end of every episode should be a little bit discussion about what we do next.
Yeah.
Now, we will obviously do more Alan Moore titles. From Hell can be the next Alan Moore title for sure. But I do think we want to, as I said, space them out a bit.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Yeah, it can't be the Alan Moore podcast.
Exactly. As much as we would love it to, a short run of just an Alan Moore dedicated podcast would be great.
Can I make you read one that I've read once before so I don't have to read something all the way from the start?
Well, I was going to say, do you want to pick the next one? Because I essentially picked this one as the Kevin O'Neill, paying homage to.
So I don't know as much about comic book stuff as you, so I don't know what's topical. Right. I'd really like to talk about Mouse, if that's okay.
Yeah, we could do Mouse next. I think we've done enough that we've hit some heavy subjects already. So I think Mouse we can look at with that analytical eye and just the positive effect it's had, its recent bannings in America and all that stuff. So we've got a lot to talk about, to be fair.
Yeah, we can talk about Mouse.
I don't think there's going to be as much of like and then this part happens, this part, because it's like...
It's the fucking Holocaust.
Yes. I think most of those parts are going to be... the relationship, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but it's going to be the relationship between characters and, you know, in the modern day, and, you know,
it's going to be quite a somber episode, isn't it?
And I think it requires a bit of respect, which it's going to be a challenge to, we always try and be a bit funny in these, so this one's going to be one that we're going to have to, you know, be respectful for and just kind of look at it as the piece of literature that comics can aspire to be, because Mouse is one of the biggest titles in that regard. It's
a conversation about generational trauma, isn't it?
Exactly. So get ready, listeners, for generational trauma next episode. I can't help myself. It's going to be a good one.
It's outro time for Jamie's outro.
Yes, and once we have something, so another point I was going to mention to you is, do we still start Twitter for this? Because that is the ultimate way to like get people to get in contact.
Fuck Twitter.
But it's also like buying a ticket for the Titanic after it's already started sinking. Like,
Isn't it?
we want to get on board. But
oh, mate, yeah, fucking hell. I mean, it's $8.
yeah. Well, that's if we get verified. And
Yeah,
like,
but you might as well at this point.
yeah, we want that blue tick, don't you?
Yeah, fucking
$8 a month. What's
Is
that?
it $8 a month?
What's that in the old money? That's like £7 something, probably.
It's
£6
more,
something.
well, at some point soon, it's going to be more than my mortgage once the fucking currency crashes.
Exactly, yeah. So
Yeah.
we'll start one. We'll look at verification down the line. We'll see what happens. I mean, Twitter might end by then.
Yeah, you never know. It might be gone.
So, but we'll get a Twitter, we'll get an Instagram.
Yeah.
Definitely the biggest thing I think we're going to focus on is getting shorter clips on TikTok.
Yeah, I'm up for that.
Get the word out and all that thing, something for people to share. And the actual releases of the episodes, we're doing some fine tweaking with regards to the editing process and sharing the kind of content editing. But I've got the technical aspects down, and then once we're kind of rolling, we're gonna have several episodes ahead naturally, and then we're going to be able to record like in bulk if we need to miss a week. So we're hoping to stick to a weekly release no matter what.
Are we on 4 or 5 episodes?
This is the 4th episode that we've just done.
Is it?
Yes. So we did.
I'll tell you what. I'll do an outro and we'll cut the recording.
Okay.
So then we can just have this conversation.
At some point, we just start talking about our day, and it's we forgot to stop recording. Like,
so that was what is this called?
The comic or the podcast?
The podcast. Comic Literate.
The Comic Literate podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Comic Literate podcast. If you'd like to hear more from Ryan, he will be shortly appearing on YouTube as Comic Stands. If you'd like to hear more from Jamie, he is on YouTube as Myths for Sad Grown-Ups. Thanks very much, and good night.
Bye.